Hello everybody, this is Gabby. My video today has a very special set of cards, actually two sets, for the challenge of my Altenew Educators Certification Program. I hope you enjoy it. I started my cards by making the backgrounds. So I got some watercolor paper, I cut them into size a little bit bigger than A2 size. I got a water spray, my inks, a brush, and some acetate. I'm going to be using a wet and wet technique. I start by spraying the paper on both sides. This way it doesn't curl up so much, it gets stuck on the surface, so it's easier than taping it down to the surface. Then I get my ink pads and smoosh them on the acetate. This way I can pick up some paint or ink from the acetate directly, or I can pick up the acetate and bring it to the paper in case I want to do that. So the technique here varies from the amount of ink and water that I added, and I wanted to have a variation. Some are lighter, some are darker, some I added more water. I let the water do the work sometimes, so I will have nice variation of backgrounds. Okay, they're ready for the second step. I let them air dry overnight. I'm going to heat emboss some details on it, and I want it to be very distressed. I'm not going to be using powder tool to get rid of the static or anything, because I don't mind powder sticking everywhere, because I want kind of a distressed look. So I'm not being very careful. I just stamp and add a little bit of the powder and then flick it off and actually use my finger to remove some of the powder here and there. Then I heat set the powder until it's really shiny and looking completely melted. For the next panels, I decided to grab the stamp with my hands to make it even more distressed, like holding some corners up so it wouldn't have like a straight surface, to make it even more distressed. Using a very shiny glittery version of embossing powder for the feminine version, and for the masculine one I'm using silver, so I'm making sure I make half and half of those background panels. Since I was already happy with the results I was getting, then I decided to work on 3 panels at a time and go really fast. Now I'm ready to make my focal elements for my card. I decided to use this beautiful stamp set by Altenew called I Adore You. I love it, it's really versatile. Since I'm making 12 cards, I need lots of those flowers and leaves. So I'm going to be removing the sentiments, I'll do them later, and right now I'm going to stamp the whole stamp set so I can get as many flowers and leaves as I can. This time I do want a nice clear clean image, so I'm using my powder tool to get rid of any static, so the powder only sticks to where the ink is. The technique here is I'm going to ink the stamps flat on the table and I'm going to bring the paper to the stamps. I place it carefully and rub with my fingers, making sure it doesn't shift, and lift it carefully so I get a clear impression. Then I sprinkle the embossing powder. This part I really like because it reminds me when I was in primary school, when you play with glitter, things like that, and you get to see the image appear, whatever you added the glue. It's kind of fun. And then the magic happens when you hit it with a heat tool and get all those beautiful images coming to life. I worked on a couple of panels at a time. I did all the gold ones first, hit emboss them, and then changed to the silver ones. I needed more leaves for the masculine version of my card, so I made a few extra stamps with only leaves. To have more sentiments, I decided to add the ones coming on the painted butterflies set, which I love. And so I added all the sentiments from that set plus the sentiments from the Adore You set, so I will have a big variety. I like using a stamp positioner when I'm stamping sentiments. It makes it easier so I can re-stamp without smushing too much the stamp, so I get clear lines. I align the sentiments into 2 rows, and I prep the surface of a black cardstock and stamped in the 2 corners of the paper to get more out of it. So I sprinkle the white powder, embossing powder, on one side, and then I get ready to stamp the other side of the paper, and then heat emboss both sides. This way everything comes faster. You just have to be careful not to touch the area where you haven't melted the powder. Make sure that I clean the areas with a dry brush and sometimes my finger. And when I heat set this, I get a bunch of sentiments that I only need to cut into strips. Now it's time to get to the fun part of watercolor painting with inks. This is going to be very easy, as similar to what I did with the backgrounds, because since I need so many images, I'm going to be doing a loose watercolor technique. So all I need is smooshing my ink pads on my surface, and then I wet each one of the images inside and actually going outside of the line, and I drop some ink and I let the water do the work. Usually I start by adding the lighter shade all over the image and then adding a few touches of the darker shade. Since I don't want everything to look the same, sometimes I start by wetting the whole surface with the light shade instead of starting with clean water, just to give a little bit of variation to the result I'm going to get. With the flowers I had a little bit more fun, like trying to get a little bit of shading here and there, following the lines from the stamp set. I did pink for the feminine version of flowers and the leaves are blue, and for the masculine version the leaves are green and the flowers are blue. I let everything air dry to minimize the exposure to the heat tool to get less working of the paper. I carefully placed the dies and held them in position with a bit of painter's tape, which I took some of the stick off by sticking it to my skin. Then I ran the panel through my die cutting machine to get beautiful, beautiful flowers and leaves. To keep everything organized, I put all my elements inside mugs, separating the feminine version in one mug and the masculine version in another mug. And then I repeated the process with all the panels I had heat embossed and painted, so I would get all my nice, beautiful elements for my cards. During my brainstorming process for this final challenge, I made a few sketches. So I made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I was going to make for the feminine version, and those same ones for the masculine version. So I decided to look at the panels and see which one will go better for that design. So I labeled them. I wrote the number on the back, so model 2, model 1, until model 6. Changing depending if I wanted like a darker background or a lighter background, depending on the design I made. So to start my process of assembling the cards, I got the panels for model number 1, and I started playing a little bit with the elements and the sentiments to see if I liked what I was getting to. Also, I wanted to make sure I had enough flowers and enough leaves to make all the cards, because I had a rough idea when I made the sketches, because I kind of counted, but I wanted to make sure, because at this point I didn't want to miss anything and not have enough of the elements. So while I was playing with the design, I decided to add a geometric element to the masculine version. So I took a lined stamp and stamped it horizontally and vertically to make squares. So I did that to all the masculine backgrounds because I kind of had this feeling that it needed something extra. Now that I'm happy with the backgrounds and I know I have enough flowers and leaves, I'm going to get the card bases and put inside the panel, the flowers, the sentiments that I'm going to need to make that specific card. There are some backgrounds that need to be cut, like these ones need to be cut in half diagonally, and I would do that to have them ready when I'm going to assemble that pair of cards. Okay, now I'm ready to assemble card number 1. It's going to be a similar process to most of them. I start by gluing the panel to the card base, and sometimes I use double-sided tape. Sometimes I use glue depending on how fast I'm working or whatever I have close to me. So after I glue this panel to the card base, I'm going to put it underneath my working surface so I can flatten it a little bit more. The next step is adding some dimension to my flowers and leaves and also the sentiment. I do it with fun foam because it's cheap, I find it everywhere, and I get to use every little scrap of it. So I get whatever is left over from another project and I cut it into small pieces, glue it to the back of my elements and let them dry. After adding some glue, I put an acrylic block on top to make sure it sticks completely to the leaf or the flower. Sometimes I curl up a little bit those flowers or leaves to give it a little bit more dimension. Then I get my panel and I start looking or remembering the idea that I had, or I referred to my little guide with my sketches, and place the elements on my card. Once I'm happy with the placement of my flowers and leaves, I get some press and seal and stick it to the images and make kind of a hinge on the side of my card, so I could lift it carefully and then my flowers and leaves will be right on the place I wanted them. Then I add some glue and flip my press and seal paper and stick the flowers and kind of actually move them a little bit in case if I need to. That's why I like using liquid glue, because it gives me a little bit of time to move things a little bit to the right place. Then I also use the trick of the acrylic block to keep things in place while it's drying. And then I'm ready to put dimension on my sentiment. I do it, using my scraps and follow the same process. Using the grid of my mat and a ruler, I get a straight line or guide to stick my sentiment into the right position, being as straight as I can. Now I need to follow the same process to make the masculine version of this model. So the steps are the same: gluing the panel to the background, adding dimension to the elements, in this case are mostly leaves, and then placing them in the right position, gluing them to my panel, and let it dry. I really like using the technique of the press and seal because it gives me a way to keep everything in place, so I can plan my placement of elements, and then without using a picture or anything, I can keep it in the right place. Now it's time for the model 2. This one is like a long panel on top with flowers or leaves coming from the top and the bottom of those panels. So that's why I'm starting with the sentiment, because I'm going to be building from there. Now I'm going to use also the press and seal to start sticking the elements, but this time is the sticky side up, so it's kind of sometimes tricky. It's sometimes moving. So I get all the flowers in a line, straight line, on the top and the bottom of the sentiment. I get it to measure a little bit so I could see how wide I needed it to be. Then I add glue to the borders so I can stick the sentiment on top, and I let it dry, and I repeat the same process for the masculine version while this is drying. The dimension I'm going to add to this card is with a rectangle behind that strip with the sentiment, and I glue it now so the leaves and the flowers are separated from the background to give it a little bit of shadow and that look of dimension. As you can see, I also add a bit of fun foam to the flowers. I did the same thing with the masculine version there, you can see very well. And I added my panel of flowers and sentiment towards the top side of my card. Okay, ready for model 3. This one is the one that I cut diagonally, the background. I'm going to use those extra pieces later, so I'm going to save them. I decided to add tiny, very thin strips of black and gold, or black and silver in the case of the masculine cards, in that border there to give an extra touch to this design. After the strips were ready and my elements had the fun foam already dried, I used the same technique with the press and seal and gluing everything in place, and that was it. I always use the grid or a ruler to guide myself gluing the sentiment, because it really looks well when it's straight there. And then I cut the excess of those strips and my cards were ready. Model number 4. Here you're gonna see lots of things that I put in there, because we need like a half circle, well, more than half of a circle from the panel, and I cut out a few other frames and things just to test what I liked. I decided to go with the black frame. I also die cut with the same die that I cut that half circle, a whole full circle of fun foam that I could stick there, and later when it's dry I can cut off that little side. Now I can assemble the elements I'm going to put halfway through that circle and the panel. So I place the panel where it's supposed to go and the flowers on top, and I flip it over just to make a mark and know where my flowers are going to land on that piece of foam, because that way I can add dimension only on the side that the flowers fall on the card panel. That way they are the same height level. Now that this is dried, I can cut the extra foam that is remaining there and place that half circle on my panel, see where the sentiment is gonna go, and do the same system for adding foam only on the right side, because the left side of the sentiment is going to be on top of that blue area that already has some fun foam behind it. Then it was just a matter of gluing everything down. Over there I played a little bit with the placement of the flowers, because I wanted them to overlap just a little bit the strip of sentiment. By now you know the process. I'm working on the masculine version, so I follow exactly the same process. Now it's model number 5. I think this is one of my favorites. I really like that light background with all the elements all over the place. I was going to do lots of dimension on this card, and then I thought it was going to be too much. They are standing out so much already as they are, that I decided to keep it more, simple, and just have them glue straight to the panel as it is. So assembling these cards was just as easy as put them all over the place and then gluing and keeping them there. I used the press and seal, especially with glue, liquid glue, so I could move the leaves or the flowers a little bit and wiggle them into place. Then I cut the excess from the back of the panels just to make it very clean. Finally, we have model 6. This one is very easy. I cut the panel into a rectangle that I glue in the center of my panel. Then I glue the elements, and I did it without dimension. I wanted a very simple card to give more options in the sets. Some are more sophisticated with dimension, and this is more like not a one layer, but it's kind of flat. These two cards came up really quick. After all my cards were done, I look at them and I really like the masculine ones, and for the feminine ones I added a couple of sequins, like white ones, to 2 or 3 cards. They didn't need much more than what I had already done. Now that all my cards are ready, I am going to make a box for them. I found this is the back of those papers that I use at school with color paper or cardstock, and I keep the backing of those little notebooks. And the plastic that I found is from a box of makeup brushes, which I use for crafting, of course, and they fit perfectly 2 envelopes there. So it was the exact perfect size for me to use to make 2 boxes. I started by drawing a sketch of the bottom base of the boxes. I really love doing this kind of sketches. I'm really good. I mean, I like drawing this kind of things. So I did the rectangle a little bit bigger than an envelope that holds an A2 size card, and that way then I drew on the sides the little sides of the box and the flaps to glue them together. Then my trick to draw this on the cardboard that I was using is to punch holes on the critical points, each corner that I needed to draw the line, and then when I lifted the paper I could follow the holes and draw the sketch on the actual cardboard that I was cutting. I really came up with that trick at that moment, and it was really a time saver for me to draw the sketch on the cardboard. Then I scored the lines to fold it properly. I really went over a few times because it's a very thick cardboard. Then I assembled the boxes. I added some strong glue to those flaps and held them with a clip for a while so they would stick properly. For that clear plastic cover, I drew a line. You can barely see it there, but I drew it with a pencil to cut it in half. Then I needed to make a little flap on the side that I was going to use for making it the right size so it would stick inside the box. So I drew the lines there, and I used an X-Acto knife to make a little bit of an indentation there. That way I could fold it better. To decorate my boxes, I got those half panels left over from the cards, and I also cut a black triangle that was a little bit bigger than that to cover the inside, and that way I couldn't see the extra glue or whatever messy areas behind that background. To attach my plastic cover to the cardboard box base, I opened some holes with a hole punch, and then I drew them exactly in place on the cardboard. I punched them, and then I got a string to attach that. I thought it was easier than dealing with the glue, plus it gave me an opportunity to add another embellishment with the string. So here are my cute boxes using recycled material. Even the string was recycled. And they really match well with the cards. I'm really proud of them. I hope you like them, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you.